Alright, number 1 says write a fraction, decimal, and a percent that could be between A and B. So I chose a number that is just a little bit more or closer to 0 than -3. So I chose -2 and 9/10. So I'm going to change that into a fraction, decimal, and percent. And we may have gotten different answers on this. That's okay, as long as your answer is between A and B. Okay, so -2 and 9/10. So I'm going to just write that out just like I said it. -2 and 9/10. It doesn't need to be simplified. We already have it written as a decimal. Now I need to change it to a percent. So remember, if we want to change a decimal to a percent, all we have to do is move our decimal place 2 places to the left. So 1, 2. Here's my new decimal place. I'm going to add in a 0. So I have -0, 0.029, or 29 thousandths. Alright, number 2 says write the bicycle times in ascending order. Remember, ascending order is from least to greatest. So I notice in my table that I have decimals and I have fractions. So I need to make them all the same so that I can write them in ascending order. So first I'm going to look at the 1 2/5, and I want to change that to a decimal. So 2/5 is a benchmark fraction, and I know that it's 4/10, so I'm just going to write that 1 4/10. The next fraction I'm going to look at is 1 9/10. 9/10 is pretty easy to write as a decimal, so 1 9/10. Now that they're all decimals, we can write them in ascending order. I'm going to start with my negative numbers because those are the least. The negative number that's farthest away from 0 would be the least, which is -1 8/10. Then our next negative number is 1 25/100. Then I would have Sue, which is just 1. Then I would have Anna, which was 1 4/10. And the greatest was Mike, which was 1 9/10. Alright, number 3. At Brian's bookstore, 36/100 of the shelves held mysteries, 25% of the shelves hold travel books, and 7/12 of the shelves hold children's books. Which type of books cover the most shelf space in the store? And explain how you arrived at your answer. Alright, so there's a couple of things that you could have done with this one. I chose to change all of mine into percent, so I could see the percent of books that were on the shelves. So I already know that travel books were 25%. So I need to change 36/100 to percent. So to do that, I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right, and I get 36%. And with the fraction, I have 7/12. In order to change that to a percent, first I'm going to write it as a decimal, and then I'll move my decimal place over. So to write this as a decimal, we have to divide. Remember that the rider always goes inside the house. The horse goes outside. Alright, so 12 does not go into 7. 12 goes into 75 times. That gives us 60. I have 10 left over. Bring down my 0. 12 goes into 100 8 times. And that gives me 96. I have 4 left over. I'm going to go ahead and go one more decimal place over. 12 goes into 40 3 times, which is 36. I have 4 left over. So if I was to keep going, that 3 is just going to keep repeating. So I'm going to put a line over the 3. Alright, so now I know that the children's books, the decimal is 583 thousandths. So if I want to change that to a percent, I'm going to move my decimal 2 places over to the right. and I get 58 and 3/10% for children's books. So I want to know which type of book covers the most, and that would be the children's books. Because the children's books covers 58 and 3/10% of the shelves. Alright, so if you wanted to explain how you got your answer, you could say that you changed all of them to percents, just like we did. Alright, number 4 says put these percents in descending order. So I need to first make them all decimals, because I can't compare the fractions because they all have different denominators. Now I noticed that all of the fractions in my percents are benchmark fractions, so this should be pretty easy. You should have your benchmark fractions memorized already. So 1/5 is really 20 hundredths or 2/10. So we would write that as 5.2%. 5 and 2/10%. The next one is 5 and 3/8%. You would write that as 5.375 or 375 thousandths. 5 and 1/4. 1/4 is 25 hundredths. So I would write that as 5.25%. And the last one is 5 and 1/3. So we would write that as 5.3%. The repeating 3. So now that I have them all as decimals, I can compare them. And remember, we're going from, we want descending order, so that means greatest to least. So the greatest percent would be the 5 and 3/8%. And then we would go to the 5 and 1/3%. We're just comparing the place value to list them from greatest to least. Then 5 and 1/4%. And lastly would be 5 and 1/5%. Now remember, just like we did in class, sometimes your answer choices may not be in percents, they may not be in decimals, or decimals as percents. They may all be in decimals, or they may all be in fractions. You need to make sure that you know how to convert all of them, just in case your answer choices are different. Alright, number 5 says write a true statement about 10/5 or 10/5. An example would be 8/2 equals 4 because 8 divided by 2 equals 4. So remember, when we have fractions, really that means that we're dividing. So I would write 10 divided by 5, or 10/5 equals 2, because 10 divided by 5 equals 2. Number 6, Marfild Junior High School had a competition for reading books. The table shows the type of book that was read by various parts of the student body at the school. Which list shows the books that were read by less than 1/2 of the students? So what I did for this problem is I changed them all to percent so I could see the percent of students that read those books. So if we want percents less than 1/2, you should already know that 1/2 is really 5/10 or 50%. So I want to know which books were read less than 50%. 2/5 is a benchmark fraction, so I would go ahead and write the decimal out, which is 4/10. To change that to a percent, we're going to move our decimal 2 places to the right, and I get 40%. Twilight was 42 hundredths. All I had to do is move that decimal 2 places to the right, and I get 42%. Hunger Games was already in percent, and the last one was Percy Jackson. Move the decimal over 2 places to the right, and I get 80%. So now I'm looking for an answer that has the books read by less than half of the students. So Harry Potter was only read by 40%, so that's less than half, so I need an answer with Harry Potter. I can cross off B and C. Twilight was 42%, which is less than 50%, so I know that my answer is D. Hunger Games and Percy Jackson, both of those percents were over 50%. Number 7, find the fraction, decimal, and percent shaded for the model. So to write this first as a fraction, that one's probably the easiest. I know that 2 are shaded out of 7. So 2 out of 7 are shaded. To change that to a decimal, we have to divide. So if you want to use the horse and rider, remember the rider goes inside the house. The horse always stays outside. You have the dog, the cat, the brother, and the sister. Now we need to divide. 7 does not go into 2. 7 goes into 20 2 times, which is 14. 20 minus 14 is 6. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 60 8 times, which is 56. Subtract, I get 4 left over. Now I'm going to go ahead and add another 0. 7 goes into 40 5 times, which is 35. Subtract, and I get 5. And I could keep going and going and going, but I'm just going to leave it in the thousands place. Since I have a remainder, I'm just going to leave it. So I get 0 decimal 285, or 285 thousandths. To change this decimal into a percent, we have to move our decimal 2 places to the right. So I get 28.5%. Alright, number 8, which of the following is the correct percent for the amount shaded in the figure shown below? So first, you should have counted how many there were total, which was 20. That's going to be my denominator, the 20. Then I need to count how many are shaded. There were 9 shaded. So if I want to change that into a percent, I have to write an equivalent fraction over 100, right? Because percent means out of 100. So in order to get from 20 to 100, I have to multiply by 5. If I multiply the denominator by 5, I have to multiply the numerator by 5. 9 times 5 gives me 45. So all I have to do is write my numerator and then add the percent sign, which is D. Alright, number 9, which of the following models correctly represents benchmark fractions and percents? So the hint was that more than one model could be your answer. Alright, so all of these were benchmark fractions, which made it a lot easier for us because we should already have them memorized. So 1/5 is really 2/10. So if we write 2/10 as a percent, we get 20%. So that one's correct. 2/5, also a benchmark fraction, is really 4/10, which would be written as 40%. So that's correct. 3/5 would be written as 6/10, which is 60%. So this one is correct. So this model correctly represents our benchmark fractions and percents. Alright, the next model we have 1/4. 1/4 I know is 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths, that would be 25%. That is definitely not 20%. So I know that this model is incorrect. And the last one, it just says 100%, 100 out of 100. That is correct. Number 10, Hayden ate 3/4 of cheesecake and 1/5 of chocolate cake. What percent of the cakes are not eaten? Alright, so 3/4 of the cheesecake. So I need to write that as a percent. So 3/4. That's a benchmark fraction, so I can automatically write it as a decimal, which is 75 hundredths. Move my decimal 2 places to the right. So 75%. Alright, then 1/5 of the chocolate cake. 1/5 is also a benchmark fraction. We write that as 2/10, which is 20%. We just have to move our decimal 2 places and add a 0. It says what percent of the cakes were not eaten? So if he ate 75% of the cheesecake, then that would mean that there's 25% that was not eaten. 100 minus 75 gives me 25. Alright, and then if 20% of the chocolate cake was eaten, I would subtract 20 and I get 80. So 80% is left of the chocolate cake. So 25% is left of the cheesecake and 80% is left of the chocolate cake that has not been eaten. Number 11, circle the value that is not equivalent to the others, and it says show all your work. Alright, so first I need to divide. Change this fraction, 8/5. So I got to divide. So let's see, the rider goes in the house, the horse stays outside. When I divide this, 5 goes into 8 one time. I have 3 left over. Bring down my 0. 5 goes into 36 times. Now I have a remainder of 0. So 8/5 would be written as 1 6/10, 1 decimal 6. Alright, 1/6, if I want to change that to a decimal so I can compare them, I have to divide. Make sure you show all your work so you don't make any mistakes. 6 does not go into 1. 6 goes into 10 one time. 6. Subtract 6, I have 4 left over, bring down my 0, 6 goes into 46 times, which is 36, subtract, and I have 4 left over. If I keep going, it's just going to repeat. 6 goes into 46 more times. So I'm just going to put my little repeating sign over the 6. So 1 6/10, and I have 1600. So those are definitely not equivalent to each other. The next one is already as a decimal, 1 6/10. So I automatically know that this fraction here, 1/6, is not equivalent to 1 decimal 6 or 1 6/10. So let's look at the next fraction, 16/10. We have to divide again. Ten goes into 16 one time. Subtract and I get 6 left over. 6 goes into 60 6 times. And then I get a remainder of 0. So 16/10 is also 1 6/10, which matches, or which is equivalent to my other numbers. And the last one is 1 3/5. So we already know 3/5 is a benchmark fraction, so I'm going to go ahead and write this as 1 6/10. And that is also correct. So the one that is not equivalent is 1/6. Alright, number 12, Mike took 12 shots with a basketball and made 9. This can be expressed as a decimal, as 75/100. What other person made shots that could be expressed as equal decimals? Alright, so Steve took 8 and he missed 4. Now, we're looking at how many shots that they made. So if he missed 4, that means he made 4. So let's see, Steve, he made 4 out of 8. 4 out of 8, I can reduce that or simplify it to 1/2. That's a benchmark fraction, so I would write that as 5/10 or 0.5. So that is not equivalent or equal to the 75/100. So I can go ahead and cross off A. Nina, she took 8, she missed 5. That means that she made 3 shots out of 8. 3/8, we can write that as 375 thousandths. That is not equivalent or equal to the 75/100. Lynn took 8 and she missed 2. So she missed 2, that means that she made she made 6 out of 8 shots. If we simplify that, we can divide by 2, and we get 3/4. 3/4 is equivalent to 75/100. So that is an equal decimal. So I'm going to go ahead and circle C, but I'm still going to check D just to make sure. So Malty, it says she took 8, missed 3. That means that she made 5 out of 8. 5 out of 8 is written as 625 thousandths. and that is not equal to 7,500. So C is our answer.